The flames licked at the night sky, casting an eerie orange glow over the small town of White Pine, Nevada, as Sophia Newell frantically pounded her fists against the second-story window of the mercantile. The smoke was getting thicker by the second, and her lungs burned with every desperate breath she took through the damp handkerchief pressed to her face. Below on the street, amid the chaos of townspeople forming a bucket brigade, a lone figure on horseback caught her eye: Ethan Vance, the newly arrived cattle rancher whose reputation had preceded him long before he'd actually ridden into White Pine 3 months ago. It was 1878, and White Pine had grown from a humble mining settlement to a proper town in the years following the Silver Strike. Sophia had arrived 2 years prior to work as a schoolteacher, determined to build a life independent of her overbearing family back east. At 24, she defied her parents' wishes that she marry the banker's son in Boston, choosing instead the adventure and independence of the frontier. Now that decision seemed like it might cost her everything as the smoke thickened around her. "Help!" she screamed, her voice growing hoarse. The crackle of burning timber competed with her cries. "Somebody please!" Ethan spotted her at the window, her honey-colored hair illuminated by the flames behind her. Without hesitation, he dismounted his stallion and pushed through the crowd gathered in front of the burning building. "Miss Newell is still inside," shouted Mayor Holloway, grabbing Ethan's arm. "The stairs have already collapsed. Get more water," Ethan commanded, shrugging off his duster coat and dousing it in a horse trough. "And find a ladder." Sheriff Miller shook his head grimly. Ladder burned up inside. It was hanging on the back wall. Ethan wrapped the wet coat around his shoulders and assessed the building. The mercantile was a wooden structure, 2 stories tall, with the owner's quarters above the shop. Sophia had been staying there temporarily after a leak had damaged the roof of her small teacher's cottage behind the schoolhouse. "There's no way in, son," said old Doc Patterson, his face solemn in the firelight. "Building's going to collapse any minute." Ethan's jaw tightened as he stared up at Sophia's terrified face in the window. He'd exchanged little more than polite greetings with the schoolteacher since his arrival, but something about her quiet dignity and the kindness she showed to every child in town, regardless of their circumstances, had caught his attention from the start. "Miss Newell," he shouted up to her. "I'm coming for you." Sophia's eyes widened in disbelief as she watched the tall cowboy dash toward the side of the building. The heat was becoming unbearable, and she could feel her strength waning. Breathing was increasingly difficult, and the room behind her was now fully engulfed in flames. Ethan spotted a sturdy oak tree with branches that extended near the building. Without hesitation, he began to climb, the rough bark tearing at his calloused hands. Below, a crowd gathered, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. "You're a fool, Vance," someone shouted. "You'll die too." Ethan ignored the warning, climbing higher until he reached a branch that extended toward the window where Sophia stood. The heat from the fire was intense even from this distance, and he could feel sweat pouring down his face. "You'll have to jump to me," he called to her, inching out onto the branch that creaked ominously under his weight. Sophia shook her head, terror evident in her eyes. "I can't." "Yes, you can," he assured her, his voice steady despite the danger. "I won't let you fall. I promise." The sound of timber cracking inside the building emphasized the urgency of the situation. Sophia looked back at the advancing flames and then at Ethan's outstretched hand. The distance between them seemed impossible, at least 6 feet of open air between the window and the nearest branch where he balanced precariously. "Sophia," he called, using her first name with an intimacy that surprised them both. "Look at me, not down. I'm not leaving without you." Their eyes locked across the distance, and something passed between them, a trust that defied their brief acquaintance. With a deep breath, Sophia climbed onto the windowsill, the heat from the fire behind her scorching her back through the thin fabric of her dress. Now, Ethan commanded. With a prayer on her lips, Sophia leaped into the darkness, her arms outstretched. For a terrifying moment, she was suspended in midair, and then Ethan's strong arms caught her, the momentum nearly sending them both plummeting to the ground below. The branch dipped dangerously, and a collective gasp rose from the crowd. Ethan held her tightly against him, his arm like a band of steel around her waist as he steadied them both. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "I've got you." Behind them, the window frame she just vacated exploded in a shower of glass and sparks as the fire consumed it. Sophia buried her face against Ethan's chest, trembling with fear and relief. "We need to move," he said urgently, guiding her to sit on the branch. "Follow me back to the trunk." Slowly, carefully, they made their way along the branch to the trunk of the oak tree, Ethan moving backward, keeping his body between Sophia and the potentially fatal drop. By the time they reached the trunk, the entire second floor of the mercantile was engulfed in flames. "Down we go," Ethan said, helping Sophia find her footing on the lower branches. Just a little further. When they finally reached the ground, a cheer went up from the gathered townspeople. Doc Patterson rushed forward with blankets, wrapping one around Sophia's shoulders while checking her for injuries. "You're the luckiest girl in Nevada," the doctor said, examining the minor burns on her hands and the singes in her hair. "And you, Vance, are either the bravest man I've ever met or the most foolhardy." Ethan didn't respond, his eyes fixed on Sophia's soot-streaked face. "Are you all right?" She nodded, coughing as her lungs struggled to clear the smoke. "Thanks to you," she managed to say, her voice raw. "Why did you—" Before she could finish her question, the mercantile's roof collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending a plume of embers skyward. The crowd scrambled backward, and Ethan instinctively pulled Sophia against him, shielding her from the wave of heat. "Because I couldn't stand by and watch," he answered simply, his arms still around her. In that moment, with the burning building illuminating his face, Sophia saw something in Ethan Vance's eyes that made her heart beat faster than the fear had something she'd never expected to find in the rugged frontier of Nevada territory. The Bucket Brigade continued their futile efforts, but it was clear the mercantile was lost. The owner, Mr. Jenkins, stood in stunned silence, watching his livelihood burn to the ground. His wife wept quietly beside him. "Everything I own was in there," Sophia whispered, the reality of her situation beginning to sink in. Her clothes, books, the small treasures she'd brought from Boston all gone. "Things can be replaced," Ethan said gently. "You can't." Sheriff Miller approached them, his weathered face grim. "Miss Newell, you'll need somewhere to stay. Mrs. Miller and I have a spare room you're welcome to use until you get sorted." "Thank you, Sheriff," Sophia said, her voice still raspy from the smoke. "That's very kind." "And Jenkins," the sheriff continued, turning to the mercantile owner, "you and the missus can take the rooms above the saloon for now. Hank says they're yours as long as you need them." As the townspeople dispersed to continue fighting the fire and prevent it from spreading to neighboring buildings, Ethan remained by Sophia's side, his steadying hand at her elbow. "You should see the doctor properly," he said, noticing her wince as she moved. "Those burns need tending." "In a moment," she replied, turning to face him fully. "Mr. Vance, Ethan, I don't know how to thank you. You risked your life for me." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "No need for thanks, Miss Newell." "Sophia," she corrected him. "After what you did tonight, I think we're well past formalities." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. "Sophia, then." A shout from near the burning building drew their attention. The men were working to keep the adjacent structures from catching fire, and it appeared they needed every able body. "I should help," Ethan said reluctantly. Will you be all right with Doc Patterson? Sophia nodded, suddenly feeling the full weight of exhaustion. Yes, but please, be careful. He squeezed her hand briefly, then hurried to join the firefighting efforts. Sophia watched him go, wondering at the strange twist of fate that had brought them together in such dramatic circumstances. Doc Patterson approached with his medical bag. Come along to my office, Miss Newell. Those burns won't wait, and you've likely inhaled more smoke than is good for anyone. As the doctor led her away, Sophia looked back over her shoulder at the burning building that had nearly become her tomb, and at the man who had refused to let that happen. In the orange glow of the fire, Ethan Vance's tall figure moved purposefully among the other men, his shoulders set with determination. That's a good man there, Doc Patterson commented, following her gaze. Not many would have done what he did tonight. No, Sophia agreed softly. Not many would. The fire burned well into the night, consuming the mercantile completely despite the town's best efforts. By dawn, nothing remained but smoldering ruins and the acrid smell of smoke that hung in the air like a pall. The cause a lantern knocked over during a scuffle between two drunken miners seemed trivial compared to the devastation it had wrought. Sophia spent that first night at the sheriff's home, lying awake despite her exhaustion, reliving the terror of being trapped and the miraculous moment when Ethan had appeared at the window. She'd known him only slightly before tonight, the quiet rancher who'd purchased the old Coleman place and kept mostly to himself. The children spoke well of him. He'd shown them how to rope and had given rides on his horse to the younger ones when he came to town for supplies. But tonight she'd seen a different side of him, the unwavering courage, the calm assurance in crisis, and something else she couldn't quite name that had passed between them when he'd caught her in his arms. As dawn broke over White Pine, Sophia finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, her dreams filled with fire and falling and strong arms that refused to let her go. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as the town began to recover from the fire. Several women arrived at the sheriff's house with donated clothing for Sophia, and the schoolchildren brought small gifts: a hair ribbon, a handkerchief, a carefully pressed wildflower. Everyone's so kind, Sophia said to Mrs. Miller as she sorted through the donated items. That's how we survive out here, the older woman replied matter-of-factly. By looking out for each other. Speaking of which, Mr. Vance is outside. Says he wants to check on you if you're receiving visitors. Sophia's heart quickened at the mention of his name. Of course, she said, smoothing her borrowed dress. Please send him in. Ethan stood in the doorway of the small sitting room, hat in hand. He looked as though he hadn't slept, with dark shadows under his eyes and soot still smudged on his face and clothes. Miss Newell, he greeted her, his deep voice sounding rougher than usual. How are you feeling? Better, thank you, she replied, gesturing for him to sit. Though I suspect you've had no rest at all. He shrugged, taking a seat across from her. We had to make sure the fire didn't spread. Old Simmons' place caught a few sparks, but we managed to save it. An awkward silence fell between them, so different from the intense connection they'd shared during the rescue. Mr. Vance, Sophia. They both spoke at once, then stopped, small smiles breaking the tension. Please go ahead, Ethan said. I just wanted to thank you properly, Sophia said, her fingers twisting in her lap. What you did was beyond brave. You saved my life. Ethan's gaze held hers steadily. Anyone would have done the same. No, she contradicted gently. They wouldn't. Sheriff Miller said the fire was too dangerous, that no one could get to me. But you found a way. A touch of color appeared on his cheekbones, visible even through the grime. I couldn't stand by and do nothing. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it, the same one she'd begun to ask the night before. Ethan looked down at his hat, turning it slowly in his hands. I've seen too much death in my life, he said finally, his voice low. During the war and after. I wasn't about to watch another life slip away if there was even a chance I could prevent it. Sophia nodded, sensing there was more to his story than he was sharing, but not wanting to press him. Well, I'm grateful, however you came to make that choice. He glanced up, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. I brought you something, he said, reaching into his pocket. It's not much, but I thought you might need it. He held out a small leather-bound book. Sophia took it, her fingers brushing his in the exchange. A journal. I noticed you writing in one sometimes, when you sit outside the schoolhouse, he explained. Figured yours was lost in the fire. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. It was, she confirmed, running her fingers over the smooth cover. Thank you. Mrs. Miller appeared in the doorway. Mr. Vance, would you care for some coffee? You look like you could use it. Thank you, madam, but I should be getting back to the ranch, Ethan replied, rising to his feet. I just wanted to make sure Miss Newell was recovering. Actually, Sophia said impulsively, I could use some fresh air. Would you mind walking with me a short way? If the doctor approves, of course. Mrs. Miller hesitated, then nodded. Doc Patterson said walking would do you good, as long as you don't overdo it. Those burns on your hands need time to heal. Ethan offered his arm, and Sophia took it gratefully, still feeling weaker than she cared to admit. They stepped out into the bright morning sunshine, a stark contrast to the terror of the previous night. The town was busy with activity men clearing debris from the burned mercantile, women bringing food to the workers, children running errands. Several people called out greetings and well wishes as they passed. Everyone's been so kind, Sophia remarked. I feel overwhelmed by their generosity. That's white pine for you, Ethan replied. Rough around the edges, but good people at heart. They walked slowly toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to the vast expanse of sage-dotted desert and distant mountains. Sophia breathed deeply, grateful for the clean air after the choking smoke. I hear you'll be staying with the Millers until your cottage is repaired, Ethan said after a companionable silence. Yes, apparently the roof can be fixed within a week or two. I'm fortunate it wasn't damaged in the fire as well. Ethan nodded. If you need anything at all, you send word to me at the ranch. That's very kind, but you've already done more than enough, Sophia assured him. They reached a wooden bench at the edge of town, positioned to look out over the valley. Sophia sat down, suddenly aware of how quickly her strength was fading. Ethan remained standing, his tall figure casting a shadow that sheltered her from the morning sun. I should let you rest, he said, noticing her fatigue. But before I go, there's something I want to ask you. Sophia looked up at him expectantly. Would you allow me to call on you? He asked, the formality of his words at odds with the rugged frontier setting. Properly, I mean, when you're feeling better. The question surprised her, though perhaps it shouldn't have. There had been something in the way he'd looked at her last night, something beyond the drama of the rescue. I'd like that, she answered honestly. A smile transformed his face, erasing some of the weariness. Good. That's good. As Ethan walked her back to the Miller's house, Sophia found herself studying him with new interest. He was tall and broad-shouldered, as befitted a man who worked cattle for a living, with sun-browned skin and dark hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. But it was his eyes that drew her attention most, a clear, steady blue that reminded her of the mountain lakes she'd seen on her journey west. Something on your mind? He asked, catching her gaze. I was just thinking that I know very little about you, she admitted. You've been in White Pine for what, 3 months? About that, he confirmed. Bought the Coleman place when the old man decided to move back east to live with his daughter. And before that? She prompted gently. A shadow crossed his face. A little of everything. Cowhand in Texas. Scout for the army for a spell. Tried my hand at mining but didn't take to it. And the war? She asked, remembering his earlier comment. Cavalry, he said shortly. Not something I care to remember most days. Sophia nodded, understanding his reluctance. The war between the states had ended 13 years ago, but its scars remained on the nation and the men who had fought. I'm sorry, she said simply, for whatever it is you carry. He glanced at her sharply, then his expression softened. Thank you. They had reached the miller's front gate. Ethan helped her up the short steps to the porch, then released her arm reluctantly. Rest well, Sophia, he said, the use of her first name still new and somehow intimate. I'll come by in a few days, if that's all right. I'd like that, she replied, suddenly shy. Thank you again, Ethan, for everything. As she watched him walk away, leading his horse down the dusty main street, Sophia felt a curious mixture of emotions, gratitude, certainly, but also a flutter of anticipation that had nothing to do with her near-death experience and everything to do with the man who had saved her. The next week passed in a blur of recovery and rebuilding. The town rallied around those affected by the fire, with everyone contributing what they could. Mr. Jenkins began planning a new mercantile, determined to rebuild bigger and better than before. Sophia's cottage behind the schoolhouse received a new roof, and several of the older students helped her clean and prepare it for her return. True to his word, Ethan called on her 3 days after the fire, arriving at the miller's house with a small bouquet of desert wildflowers. Mrs. Miller invited him to stay for supper, and Sophia was charmed by the way the normally reserved Cowboy made an effort to engage in conversation, asking Sheriff Miller about the town's history and complimenting Mrs. Miller on her cooking with genuine appreciation. You've made quite an impression on our Mr. Vance, Mrs. Miller commented after he'd left, her eyes twinkling with knowing amusement. Never seen him so talkative. Sophia felt a blush rise to her cheeks. He's just being kind after what happened. Mrs. Miller made a non-committal sound as she cleared the dishes. If you say so, dear, though most men don't bring flowers for mere kindness. The older woman's words stayed with Sophia as she prepared for bed that night. Was it possible that Ethan's interest in her predated the fire? She'd noticed him watching her occasionally when she taught the children outdoors on fine days, but she'd attributed it to natural curiosity about a newcomer to town. And what of her own feelings? The terror of the fire had heightened everything, creating an artificial bond between rescuer and rescued. Yet there was something about Ethan Vance that intrigued her beyond gratitude, a depth to him that she sensed but couldn't yet define. 2 days later, Ethan appeared at the schoolhouse just as Sophia was dismissing her students for the day. He waited patiently as she said goodbye to each child, answering their endless questions about the fire with gentle reassurances that she was indeed fully recovered. Mr. Vance, exclaimed young Tommy Peterson, the last to leave. Did you really climb a tree and catch Miss Newell when she jumped out the window? Ethan ruffled the boy's hair with a smile. Something like that, Tommy. Now run along home before your ma starts to worry. When they were alone, Sophia gathered her teaching materials, suddenly aware of her plain work dress and hair that had escaped its pins during the school day. This is a surprise, she said. I thought you'd be busy at the ranch. Got my chores done early, he replied, helping her stack the primers. Thought I might walk you home, if you'd like the company. I would, she said, pleased by the unexpected visit. My cottage is habitable again as of yesterday. The children have been so excited to help me move back in. They walked together along the path that led behind the schoolhouse to the small teacher's cottage. It was a modest dwelling, just one main room with a curtained-off sleeping area, a small kitchen, and a covered porch, but to Sophia, it represented independence and achievement. It's not much, she said as they approached. But it's mine. Or at least, the school board's, but they allow me to make it my own. It's a fine place, Ethan said approvingly, examining the new roof. Looks like they did good work on the repairs. As they reached the porch, Sophia hesitated, unsure of the protocol. Would it be proper to invite him inside? They were in full view of the town, but still. I noticed your woodpile is getting low, Ethan said, solving her dilemma. If you'll point me to an axe, I'd be happy to chop some more for you before the weather turns. Oh, that's very kind, but you don't need to. I'd like to, he interrupted gently. If you'll let me. Something in his tone made her look up at him sharply. There was an earnestness in his expression that touched her. All right, she agreed. There's an axe in the shed around back. But please, let me make you some coffee first. It's the least I can do. Inside the cottage, Sophia busied herself with the coffee pot while Ethan looked around with interest. The small space was neat and cozy, with a braided rug on the floor, curtains at the windows, and a bookshelf filled with well-worn volumes. You're a reader, he observed, scanning the titles. Books have always been my escape, she admitted, setting 2 cups on the small table. And my companions. Growing up in Boston, I often preferred the company of Dickens and Austen to most of the people I knew. Ethan's fingers traced the spine of a poetry collection. I haven't read much since the war, he said quietly. Used to enjoy it, though. You're welcome to borrow anything that catches your interest, Sophia offered, pouring the coffee. I'm always happy to share good books with an appreciative reader. He selected a slim volume of Wordsworth's poems. Maybe I'll start with this, he said, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice. If you're sure you don't mind. Not at all, she assured him, pleased by his choice. Though I warn you, Wordsworth can be addictive. They sat at the small table, drinking coffee and talking easily about books, the school, and the town. Ethan told her about his ranch, the struggles and satisfactions of building something from scratch, his plans for expanding his herd next spring, the cabin he'd been improving bit by bit. It sounds wonderful, Sophia said, genuinely interested. I've never seen a working ranch up close. You should visit sometime, he said, then hastily added. With proper chaperonage, of course, perhaps a school outing? The children might enjoy seeing the calves. Sophia smiled at his concern for propriety. That's a splendid idea. The children would love it, and it would be educational as well. When they'd finished their coffee, Ethan went outside to chop wood while Sophia prepared her lessons for the next day. Through the window, she watched him work, admiring the efficient strength in his movements. There was something deeply appealing about a man who found satisfaction in physical labor, in creating and building rather than destroying. By the time he finished, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks that reminded Sophia too vividly of the fire. She stepped onto the porch, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. That should last you at least until next month, Ethan said, wiping his brow with his sleeve. He'd removed his coat while working, and his shirt clung to him in places, damp with honest sweat. Thank you, Sophia said, suddenly conscious of how domestic the scene must appear to anyone passing by the schoolteacher on her porch watching a man chop wood for her hearth. Would you stay for supper? It's nothing fancy, just some stew I made yesterday, but there's plenty. Ethan hesitated, clearly tempted. I shouldn't impose. It's not an imposition, she assured him. After all that work, the least I can offer is a meal. He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. All right, thank you. Sophia bustled about the small kitchen, heating the stew and slicing bread while Ethan washed up at the pump outside. When he returned, his hair was damp and his face freshly scrubbed, making him look younger and somehow more vulnerable. They ate at the small table, the single lamp casting a warm glow over their meal. Sophia found herself telling him about her life in Boston, her strict father who believed education was wasted on daughters, her mother who secretly encouraged her love of learning, the suffocating expectations of society that had ultimately driven her west. It was either marry Harold Pembroke and become a society wife or find my own path, she explained, breaking off a piece of bread. I chose the path. Harold's loss was White Pine's gain, Ethan said with a smile that transformed his serious face. What about you? She asked. What brought you to Nevada? Ethan was quiet for a moment, stirring his stew thoughtfully. After the war, I drifted, he said finally. Couldn't settle anywhere for long. The memories. He trailed off, then continued with visible effort. I saw an ad for the Coleman place in a Denver newspaper. Something about it called to me, maybe the mountains or the distance from anywhere I'd been before. Seemed like a good place to finally put down roots. And has it been? A good place. His eyes met hers across the table. Getting better all the time. The simple statement, and the way he looked at her as he said it, sent a flutter through Sophia's chest. This was happening too fast, she thought. The fire had accelerated something that might otherwise have developed slowly or perhaps never at all. After supper, Ethan insisted on helping with the washing up, drying the dishes with careful attention while Sophia washed. They worked in companionable silence, and Sophia found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her, the clean scent of soap mingled with leather and pine, the careful way he handled her chipped plates, the occasional brush of his arm against hers in the small space. When the kitchen was tidy, Ethan reluctantly reached for his hat. I should be going. It's a fair ride back to the ranch. Sophia walked with him to the door. Thank you for the wood, and for your company. Both are much appreciated. The pleasure was mine, he replied, his voice low in the quiet room. May I call on you again? Perhaps Sunday, after church. I'd like that very much, Sophia said, surprised by how much she meant it. Ethan hesitated at the doorway, looking down at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, and more surprisingly, she found herself hoping he would. But he merely touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. Good night, Sophia, he said softly. Sleep well. Good night, Ethan, she replied, watching as he mounted his horse and rode away into the gathering darkness. She closed the door and leaned against it, her heart beating faster than it should. What was happening to her? She'd come west to be independent, to build a life on her own terms, not to fall under the spell of a handsome cowboy with kind eyes and gentle hands. And yet, as she readied herself for bed, Sophia found her thoughts returning again and again to Ethan Vance, to his courage, his quiet strength, and the way he looked at her as if she were something precious. Sleep came slowly that night, and when it did, her dreams were filled not with fire and fear, but with blue eyes and the solid warmth of arms that had refused to let her fall. Sunday arrived clear and crisp, with the promise of autumn in the air. Sophia dressed with particular care for church, selecting her best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out the gold highlights in her brown hair, and arranging her hair in a style that was neat but flattering. You look lovely, Miss Newell, remarked Mrs. Peterson as Sophia took her usual seat in the small church. Recovering nicely from your ordeal, I see. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. I'm feeling much better. The service passed in a blur for Sophia, who found her attention wandering repeatedly to the tall figure seated several pews back. Ethan wore a clean black suit that looked as though it didn't see much use, his dark hair neatly combed, his normally sun-bronzed face freshly shaved. When their eyes met briefly during a hymn, the small smile he gave her caused her to lose her place in the music. After the service, the congregation gathered outside for the usual socializing. Sophia was immediately surrounded by well-wishers and curious townsfolk still eager to hear about her dramatic rescue. She answered their questions patiently, downplaying her own terror and emphasizing Ethan's courage. "Speaking of Mr. Vance," said Mrs. Wilson, the butcher's wife, with a knowing look, "he certainly cleaned up nice today. Don't think I've ever seen him in a proper suit before." "He looks very respectable," Sophia agreed neutrally, though her eyes sought him out in the crowd. He was speaking with Sheriff Miller and several other men, probably discussing town business. As if sensing her gaze, Ethan looked up and met her eyes. He excused himself from the men and made his way toward her, navigating through the crowd with a purposeful stride that made several heads turn. "Miss Newell," he greeted her formally, conscious of the curious eyes upon them. "I was wondering if I might walk you home." "I'd appreciate that, Mr. Vance," she replied with equal formality, though her heart beat faster at the prospect. They said their goodbyes to the various townspeople and set off toward Sophia's cottage. Once they were away from the church and the prying eyes, Ethan's posture relaxed slightly. "I'm not much for crowds," he admitted. "Or suits, for that matter." Sophia smiled up at him. "You wear it well, though I must admit, I'm more accustomed to seeing you in your working clothes." "Got to make an effort for the Lord," he said with a hint of humor. "And for the company." The compliment, indirect as it was, brought a flush to Sophia's cheeks. They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, enjoying the pleasant weather and each other's company. "I was thinking," Ethan said as they neared her cottage, "there's a spot up in the hills not far from my ranch, a small lake with a view of the whole valley. If you'd care for a picnic next Saturday, I'd be honored to show it to you." Sophia hesitated. A picnic alone with Ethan would certainly raise eyebrows in town. As if reading her thoughts, he added quickly, "Mrs. Miller mentioned she enjoys sketching. Perhaps she'd like to come along and capture the view." Relief and a tiny flicker of disappointment mingled in Sophia's response. "That sounds lovely. I'm sure Mrs. Miller would be delighted to join us." They reached her cottage, and Sophia invited him in for tea. As they sat at her small table once again, she found herself studying his face, the strong jawline, the small scar near his right temple, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. "Tell me more about Boston," Ethan said, breaking into her thoughts. "Do you miss it?" Sophia considered the question carefully. "I miss certain aspects, the libraries, the concerts, the changing seasons, but not enough to return. There's a freedom here that I never had there." "Freedom's worth a lot," Ethan agreed. "It's what I fought for, though I didn't always recognize it at the time." "The war must have been terrible," Sophia said gently, sensing the shadows that still haunted him. Ethan looked down at his cup. "It was. Men at their worst, doing things they'd never imagined themselves capable of." He paused, then added quietly, "I lost my brother at Gettysburg. He was just 19. Sophia reached across the table and laid her hand over his. "I'm so sorry, Ethan." He turned his hand to hold hers, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "It was a long time ago now, but some wounds heal slower than others." They sat like that, hands joined across the table, for a long moment. Sophia felt an unexpected connection forming between them, not just attraction, but something deeper, a recognition of kindred spirits despite their different backgrounds. "I should let you enjoy what's left of your Sunday," Ethan said finally, reluctantly withdrawing his hand. "Thank you for the tea, and for listening." "Thank you for sharing," she replied. "Not everyone finds that easy." At the door, he turned to her with a seriousness that made her heart skip. "Sophia, I want you to know that I've come to care for you, more than I expected to care for anyone again. But I understand if you need time, or if your feelings don't match mine." The directness of his statement took her breath away. In Boston, courtship was a dance of implications and subtle signals, never this honest declaration of feeling. Ethan, she said, finding her voice. My feelings may be new and still forming, but they're real. I care for you too. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. That's good to hear. This time, when he leaned down, she knew he would kiss her, and she rose slightly on her toes to meet him. His lips were gentle on hers, the kiss brief but full of promise. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers, making sure she was comfortable with this step. Sophia smiled up at him, her heart full. I'll see you Saturday? Saturday, he confirmed, his voice husky. With a final touch of her hand, he left, and Sophia watched him go with a curious mixture of excitement and peace. The week passed with agonizing slowness for Sophia. She threw herself into her teaching, but found her thoughts constantly drifting to Ethan and the brief, sweet kiss they had shared. Several times she caught herself daydreaming while her students worked on their arithmetic, earning curious glances from the older children who were not used to seeing their teacher so distracted. Miss Newell, are you thinking about Mr. Vance? Asked 8-year-old Sarah Miller on Thursday afternoon as Sophia helped her with a difficult sum. Ma says he's sweet on you. Sophia felt her cheeks warm. Your mother has a vivid imagination, Sarah. Now, let's focus on this problem. But Sarah was not to be deterred. Ma says you're sweet on him too, on account of how you blush whenever someone mentions his name. Just like you're doing now. Sarah Miller, that will be quite enough, Sophia said with as much dignity as she could muster. Please return to your work. That evening, as Sophia prepared her supper alone in her cottage, she reflected on the child's words. Was she really so transparent? And if so, what did the town make of their budding relationship? Not that it mattered what others thought, she reminded herself firmly. She was a grown woman, entitled to pursue her own happiness. If that happiness included Ethan Vance, then so be it. Saturday dawned clear and perfect for a picnic. Sophia packed a basket with bread, cheese, and apple tarts she'd baked the previous evening. Mrs. Miller arrived promptly at 10, carrying her sketching materials and wearing a knowing smile that made Sophia blush all over again. It's a beautiful day for an outing, the sheriff's wife remarked innocently. And so kind of Mr. Vance to think of including me. Yes, wasn't it? Sophia replied, refusing to rise to the bait. Ethan arrived soon after, driving a wagon rather than riding his usual horse. He'd cleaned up again, though less formally than for church, wearing a fresh shirt and his least worn pair of denims. His smile when he saw Sophia made her heart flutter embarrassingly. Ladies, he greeted them, helping first Mrs. Miller and then Sophia up onto the wagon seat. His hand lingered on Sophia's waist a moment longer than strictly necessary, and she felt the warmth of it even through her dress. The drive to Ethan's ranch took about an hour, during which Mrs. Miller kept up a steady stream of town gossip and cheerful observations about the landscape. Sophia was grateful for the older woman's tact in focusing her attention out the side of the wagon, giving Sophia and Ethan the illusion of privacy as they sat beside each other on the seat. You look lovely today, Ethan said quietly, his eyes warm as they took in her simple blue dress and the straw hat that shaded her face. Thank you, Sophia replied, equally soft. It's a beautiful day for a picnic. His gloved hand found hers on the seat between them, hidden from Mrs. Miller's view by the folds of Sophia's skirt. The simple contact sent a thrill through her that seemed out of proportion to the gesture itself. Ethan's ranch was modest but well-maintained, a sturdy cabin, a barn, corrals for the horses and cattle, all set against the backdrop of pine-covered hills. He showed them around briefly, introducing them to his ranch hand, Miguel, and showing Sophia the small garden he'd started behind the cabin. Not much yet, he said almost apologetically, but I've got plans to expand it next spring. Maybe plant some fruit trees too. Sophia could see he was building something here, not just a ranch, but a home. The thought warmed her in unexpected ways. After the tour, they loaded the picnic basket into the wagon again, and Ethan drove them up into the hills, following a narrow trail that wound through stands of pine and aspen. The higher they climbed, the more spectacular the views became, until finally they emerged at a small alpine lake, crystal clear and reflecting the blue sky above. "Oh, it's magnificent!" Sophia exclaimed, taking in the panoramic view of the valley below and the mountains beyond. "I've never seen anything so beautiful. It's my favorite spot," Ethan said, helping her down from the wagon. "I come up here sometimes just to think." Mrs. Miller immediately set up her sketching easel at a vantage point overlooking the valley. "You two go on and enjoy your picnic," she said with a wave of her hand. "I'll be quite absorbed in my work for at least an hour." Sophia shot her a grateful look, recognizing the deliberate gift of time alone that the older woman was offering them, while still maintaining the propriety of her presence. Ethan spread a blanket near the lake's edge, beneath the shade of a large pine tree. As they unpacked the basket and laid out the food, Sophia found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't expected. There was something easy and natural about being with Ethan, even in this somewhat contrived situation. "I hope the town isn't gossiping too much," Ethan said as they ate, echoing her earlier thoughts. Sophia smiled ruefully. "According to Sarah Miller, your interest in me is common knowledge, as is my reciprocation. Does that bother you?" he asked, his expression suddenly concerned. "No," she said honestly. "I'm past caring what others think of my personal choices. That's part of why I left Boston to live by my own standards, not society's." Relief softened his features. "Good. Because I'd hate to think I was causing you any discomfort." "Far from it," she assured him, feeling bold enough to add. "In fact, your company brings me considerable joy." The smile that spread across his face was worth any amount of town gossip. They ate in companionable silence for a while, enjoying the beauty of their surroundings and the simple pleasure of each other's company. "Tell me about your plans for the ranch," Sophia said eventually. "You mentioned expanding the garden?" Ethan nodded, enthusiasm lighting his features as he described his vision: the orchard he wanted to plant, the additional grazing land he hoped to purchase, the improvements to the cabin he planned for the winter months. "It sounds wonderful," Sophia said when he'd finished. "You've thought of everything." "Almost everything," he amended, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "A home needs more than just land and buildings to be complete." The implication hung between them, unspoken but clear. Sophia looked down at her hands, suddenly aware of how quickly their relationship was progressing. It had been barely 2 weeks since the fire, yet already she was contemplating possibilities she'd never imagined when she came west. "Ethan," she began, not sure what she wanted to say. "I'm not rushing you," he said quickly. "I know it's been a short time, but I also know what I feel and I think. I hope you might eventually feel the same." Sophia looked up at him, taking in the earnest hope in his eyes, the strength and kindness in his face. "I think I might already," she admitted softly. His hand found hers on the blanket, fingers intertwining with gentle pressure. "Then we have time to be sure. All the time you need." From her vantage point at the easel, Mrs. Miller glanced over at them and smiled to herself before returning to her sketch. The young couple made a perfect picture against the backdrop of the lake and mountains, two souls finding each other in this vast, sometimes harsh frontier. As the afternoon wore on, they walked along the lakeshore, talking of books and dreams and the simple pleasures of daily life. Ethan told her more about his family, the parents he'd lost to influenza when he was 16, the brother who'd followed him into the cavalry and never returned. Sophia shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her early teaching experiences, and her sometimes difficult journey west. I was terrified the whole time, she admitted with a laugh, but also exhilarated. Every mile took me further from the life others had planned for me and closer to the one I wanted to create. Courage isn't about not being afraid, Ethan said, picking up a flat stone and skipping it across the lake's surface. It's about feeling the fear and doing what needs doing anyway. Like climbing a tree to rescue someone from a burning building? Sophia suggested with a smile. He shrugged, a touch of color appearing on his cheekbones. That was different. I wasn't thinking about courage or fear. I was just thinking about you. The simple statement touched her deeply. Before she could respond, Mrs. Miller called to them from her easel. I hate to interrupt, but we should probably start back soon if we want to reach town before dark. The return journey seemed shorter somehow, filled with conversation and laughter. Mrs. Miller regaled them with stories of White Pine's early days, when it had been little more than a collection of tents and rough cabins housing hopeful miners. The town's grown a lot since then, she concluded as they approached the outskirts of White Pine in the golden late afternoon light. But we still need good people to help it thrive. People like you too. Sophia and Ethan exchanged glances, both recognizing the gentle nudge in the older woman's words. After dropping Mrs. Miller at her home with sincere thanks for her company, Ethan drove Sophia to her cottage. He helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Thank you for today, Sophia said, reluctant for their time together to end. It was perfect. The company made it so, Ethan replied, his voice low. May I call on you again tomorrow after church? Please do, she said, smiling up at him. This time when he kissed her, there was less hesitation, more certainty. His lips were warm and gentle on hers, one hand coming up to cup her cheek with exquisite tenderness. Sophia leaned into the kiss, her heart racing with emotions too new and powerful to name. When they parted, Ethan's eyes were dark with feeling. Good night, Sophia, he murmured. Good night, Ethan, she replied, her voice not quite steady. She watched him drive away, then went inside and closed the door, leaning against it as she had that first night. But this time, the flutter in her chest was not confusion or surprise, it was happiness, pure and simple, and the growing certainty that her life in White Pine was taking a turn she had never anticipated, but now couldn't imagine rejecting. The autumn days grew shorter, and Sophia and Ethan's relationship deepened with the changing season. He called on her regularly, sometimes just for brief visits after school, other times for longer outings on weekends. The town observed their courtship with approval and the occasional gentle teasing, but mostly with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a community that valued happiness where it could be found on the often harsh frontier. By November, when the first snow dusted the mountains around White Pine, Ethan was a regular visitor at Sophia's cottage, joining her for supper several times a week. They established comfortable routines. He would bring game or beef from his ranch, she would cook, and they would spend the evening reading aloud to each other or simply talking by the fire. Your student's reading has improved remarkably, Ethan commented one evening as he helped Sophia grade spelling tests at her small table. He had taken to helping her with school tasks, revealing a patience with children's efforts that touched her deeply. Having you come in to listen to them practice has been wonderful motivation, she replied, smiling at him across the pile of papers. Especially for the boys. They're all desperate to impress you. Can't imagine why, he said with a self-deprecating smile. I'm just a rancher. You're a man they respect, Sophia corrected gently. A man who takes time to teach them things and listen to them. That means a great deal, especially to those without fathers at home. Ethan looked thoughtful, then hesitant. Speaking of the children, I've been thinking about Christmas. What about it? Sophia asked, setting aside her grading pencil. It's only a few weeks away, he said, And I was wondering if you might help me organize something for the school. A celebration of sorts, with presents for the children who might not otherwise have much. Sophia's heart warmed at the suggestion. That's a wonderful idea. We could have a tree in the schoolhouse, and perhaps some simple gifts, books or warm mittens. I've been setting aside some money, Ethan said, looking pleased by her enthusiasm. And I thought we might approach some of the other businesses in town for contributions. Ethan Vance, Sophia said, reaching across the table to take his hand. You are a good man. He looked down at their joined hands, his expression serious. I'm trying to be. For a long time after the war, I wasn't sure I had it in me anymore to care about others, to build instead of destroy. But being here, meeting you, it's changed things. Sophia squeezed his hand, understanding the admission for the gift it was. We all have the capacity for both darkness and light, she said softly. What matters is which one we choose to nurture. Ethan raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. You make it easy to choose the light. The moment hung between them, fraught with unspoken feelings. Then Ethan cleared his throat and reluctantly released her hand. I should probably head back to the ranch, he said, though he made no move to rise. It's getting late, and the snow's likely to get worse before morning. Sophia glanced out the window at the fat, lazy flakes drifting past the glass. It does look like it's picking up, she agreed with equal reluctance. Ethan stood and reached for his coat. I'll come by the school tomorrow afternoon. If that's all right, we can start planning the Christmas celebration. I'd like that, Sophia said, rising to walk him to the door. On the threshold, he turned to her, his tall frame filling the doorway. Sophia, he began, then seemed to struggle for words. Yes? She prompted when he fell silent. Instead of speaking, he pulled her gently into his arms, his kiss deeper and more urgent than those they'd shared before. Sophia responded without hesitation, her arms sliding around his neck, her body fitting perfectly against his. For a long moment, there was nothing but the warmth of his embrace, the softness of his lips, and the certainty growing in her heart. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said simply. I think I have since the moment I saw you at that window, refusing to give up even with the fire all around you. Sophia's heart soared at the words she'd been hoping to hear. And I love you, she whispered back. More than I thought possible. He kissed her once more, briefly but with feeling, then stepped reluctantly into the snowy night. I'll see you tomorrow, he promised. Sophia watched until he disappeared into the swirling white, then closed the door against the cold, her heart warmer than it had ever been. The next day brought a foot of fresh snow and temperatures that kept most of the children home from school. Sophia used the quiet day to catch up on grading and to begin planning the Christmas celebration Ethan had suggested. By afternoon, the sun had emerged, melting some of the snow and making the paths passable again. True to his word, Ethan arrived just as she was preparing to leave the schoolhouse. He stomped snow from his boots at the door, his cheeks ruddy from the cold, a cloth-wrapped package under his arm. I wasn't sure you'd make it in this weather, Sophia said, pleased to see him despite her concern. Wouldn't miss it, he replied, unwrapping the package to reveal a fresh loaf of bread. Miguel's wife sent this for you, said you were too thin. Sophia laughed, accepting the gift. Please thank her for me. That was very thoughtful. They spent the next hour planning the Christmas celebration, making lists of what they would need and which townspeople might contribute. Ethan's enthusiasm was contagious, and Sophia found herself imagining the children's faces when they saw the decorated tree and presents. It will be wonderful, she said as they finished their planning. The children will remember it forever. That's the idea, Ethan agreed, watching her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the stove heating the schoolroom, making memories worth keeping. As they walked through the snow to Sophia's cottage, Ethan seemed preoccupied, answering her questions about the ranch with uncharacteristic brevity. When they reached her door, he hesitated. "Would you come out to the ranch with me tomorrow?" he asked suddenly. "There's something I want to show you." "Of course," Sophia agreed, curious about his serious expression. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," he assured her, his smile returning. "Better than fine. There's something I need to do, and I'd like you to be there." The next day was Saturday, and Ethan arrived early with the wagon. The weather had improved, with clear skies and sunshine that made the snow-covered landscape glitter like diamonds. Sophia wore her warmest coat and brought along a basket with lunch, still wondering about Ethan's mysterious request. The ranch looked different in winter, the corrals half buried in snow, icicles hanging from the cabin's eaves, smoke curling from the chimney in a lazy spiral. Miguel greeted them as they arrived, taking the horses with a knowing smile that made Sophia even more curious. "Come inside," Ethan said, helping her down from the wagon. "There's something I want to talk to you about." The cabin was warm and inviting, with a fire crackling in the stone fireplace. Sophia had been there before, but today she noticed small changes: new curtains at the windows, a braided rug before the hearth, a vase of dried wildflowers on the table. "You've been decorating," she observed, removing her coat. "Trying to make it more of a home," Ethan agreed, taking her coat and hanging it by the door. He seemed nervous, which was unlike him. "Would you like some coffee?" "Please," she said, following him to the small kitchen area. As he prepared the coffee, Sophia wandered to the window that looked out toward the mountains. The view was spectacular, with the snow-covered peaks gleaming in the sunshine. She could understand why Ethan had chosen this place to start over. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, coming to stand beside her with 2 steaming cups. "Breathtaking," she agreed, accepting the coffee. "You found a little piece of heaven here." "It's getting there," he said, his eyes on her face rather than the view. "But it's still missing the most important part." Sophia turned to look at him, something in his tone making her heart beat faster. "And what's that?" Ethan set his coffee down on the windowsill, then took hers and placed it beside his. With gentle hands, he turned her to face him fully. "Sophia," he began, his voice deep with emotion. "When I came to Nevada, I was running from memories I couldn't face and a future I couldn't imagine. I bought this land thinking it would be just a place to exist, to get through each day until—" He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But then I met you. And suddenly, I wasn't just existing anymore. I was living again, hoping again." He took her hands in his blue eyes earnest and vulnerable. "I love you, Sophia Newell. I love your courage, your kindness, your determination. I love the way you care for your students, the way you see beauty in simple things, the way you've helped me believe in second chances." Sophia's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must hear it. "Ethan," she whispered, but he gently squeezed her hands. "Please let me finish," he said with a small smile. "I need to say this properly." He took a deep breath, then continued. "I know it hasn't been very long, and I know you came west to be independent. The last thing I want is to take that from you. But I also know that I want to spend my life with you, building something together that's better than either of us could create alone." Reaching into his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box and sank to one knee before her. "Sophia Newell, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Sophia's eyes as he opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring, a small diamond flanked by 2 sapphires that matched the blue of his eyes. For a moment, she couldn't speak, overwhelmed by emotion. "Yes," she finally managed, her voice breaking. "Yes, Ethan, I will marry you." His face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to take her in his arms. His kiss was tender and passionate at once, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I was so afraid you might say no," he admitted, "that it was too soon, or that you weren't ready to give up your independence." Sophia touched his face gently. "Being with you doesn't mean giving up who I am," she said. "It means finding someone who values that person, who wants to walk beside me rather than lead me or follow me. Always," he promised, kissing her again, "for as long as I live." They spent the rest of the day in a bubble of happiness, walking the property together as Ethan pointed out the improvements he planned for spring, the spot where he thought they might plant an orchard, the meadow where wildflowers bloomed in summer. Now all his plans included her, and Sophia found herself eagerly contributing ideas, imagining their future unfolding in this beautiful place. By the time they returned to town that evening, the news of their engagement had somehow preceded them, likely thanks to Miguel, and they were greeted with congratulations and well wishes from everyone they passed. "Didn't I tell you?" Mrs. Miller said, beaming as she admired Sophia's ring. "I knew from the moment he climbed that tree for you that this day would come." In the weeks that followed, Sophia and Ethan were busy with both wedding plans and preparations for the school's Christmas celebration. The town embraced both events with enthusiasm, with the women organizing a sewing circle to help Sophia with her wedding dress and the men contributing lumber and labor to build new shelves and benches for the schoolhouse as a wedding gift. The Christmas celebration was everything they had hoped for. The schoolhouse was transformed with greenery and ribbons. A tall pine tree stood in the corner decorated with paper stars made by the children, and beneath it lay gifts for every student: books, warm mittens, carved wooden toys, and bags of candy. Ethan played Santa Claus, his tall frame comically at odds with the role, but his genuine joy in the children's happiness perfectly suited to it. Watching him with the students, Sophia felt her heart overflow with love. He would make a wonderful father, she thought, imagining their own children someday gathered around him as these were now. "A penny for your thoughts," said Mrs. Miller, joining her by the refreshment table. "Just thinking about the future," Sophia replied with a smile, her hand unconsciously touching the ring she now wore. "And how blessed I am." "You both are," the older woman agreed. "It's not everyone who finds a love like yours. Cherish it." "I intend to," Sophia promised, her eyes finding Ethan across the room. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up from the child on his lap and smiled at her. A private moment in the midst of the festive chaos. They were married on New Year's Day, 1879, in the small white pine church, with the whole town in attendance. Sophia wore a gown of ivory silk that the women had helped her sew, with seed pearls salvaged from her mother's wedding dress that had fortuitously been stored in a trunk at the schoolhouse rather than lost in the fire. Ethan waited for her at the altar, looking both nervous and elated in his new suit. When Sophia walked down the aisle on Sheriff Miller's arm, the sheriff having offered to stand in for her father, Ethan's eyes never left her face, his expression so full of love that several of the women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. When it came time for the vows, Ethan's voice rang out clear and sure. "I, Ethan James Vance, take you, Sophia Elizabeth Newell, to be my lawful wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part." Sophia repeated the words with equal conviction, her heart so full she thought it might burst. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Ethan's kiss was both reverent and promising, a perfect beginning to their life together. The celebration afterward was held in the town hall, with tables laden with food contributed by every household in White Pine. There was music and dancing, speeches and toasts, laughter, and a few happy tears. As evening fell, Ethan and Sophia slipped away to begin their journey to the ranch, their home now, together. The snow had stopped earlier in the day, leaving a clear, star-filled sky above them as they drove the now familiar road. Sophia nestled against Ethan's side on the wagon seat, his arm warm around her shoulders. "Happy, Mrs. Vance?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Completely, Mr. Vance," she replied, tilting her face up for a proper kiss. When they reached the ranch, Ethan surprised her by lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold of the cabin. Inside, a fire burned warmly in the hearth, and the table was set for a simple supper, with candles and the same dried wildflowers she'd noticed on her previous visit. "Welcome home," Ethan said, setting her gently on her feet. "Home," Sophia repeated, looking around the cabin with new eyes. "Our home." That night, they discovered a new dimension to their love, the physical expression of the emotional bond that had grown between them since that fateful night of the fire. Ethan was gentle and patient, his hands and lips reverent as he learned the secrets of her body. And Sophia found herself responding with an abandon she'd never imagined herself capable of. Afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness, listening to the wind singing around the eaves of their cabin, Sophia felt a sense of completion she'd never known before. This was what she'd been seeking, perhaps without even realizing it, not just independence, but the freedom to choose her own path and the joy of finding someone to walk it with her. "I love you," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his chest, above his heart. "And I love you," he murmured back, his arms tightening around her. "More than I have words to say." Spring came early to Nevada that year, bringing new growth and possibilities. Sophia continued teaching at the school, riding back and forth each day on the mare Ethan had given her as a wedding gift. The children adapted quickly to calling her Mrs. Vance instead of Miss Newell, though occasionally one of the younger ones would forget and have to be gently corrected. At the ranch, Ethan and Sophia worked side by side to expand the garden, plant the orchard he had envisioned, and make improvements to the cabin. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and purple, planning their future together. "I was thinking," Ethan said one such evening in late April, his arm around Sophia as they shared the porch swing he'd built for her birthday, "that we might need to add on to the cabin soon." "Oh," Sophia replied, puzzled by his serious tone. "Are you planning to take on more ranch hands?" "No," he said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "But I thought our child might appreciate having a room of their own eventually." For a moment, Sophia didn't understand. Then her eyes widened as his meaning became clear. "Ethan, are you saying?" "Doc Patterson confirmed it yesterday," he said, his face breaking into a full smile now. "You're going to have a baby, Sophia. Sometime in November, he thinks." Joy bubbled up inside her, and she threw her arms around his neck. "A baby? Oh, Ethan, are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said, holding her close. Ecstatic, terrified, grateful, all of those at once. Sophia laughed, understanding exactly what he meant. "I've suspected for a few weeks now, but I wanted to be sure before I said anything." "You're not concerned about the timing?" Ethan asked, a touch of worry creeping into his voice. "It's soon, I know. We've barely been married 4 months. It's perfect timing," she assured him, taking his hand and placing it over her still flat stomach. "Our child will be born in the home we've made together, surrounded by love from the very beginning. What could be better than that?" The months that followed were busy ones. Ethan added 2 rooms to the cabin, one for the baby and one that would serve as Sophia's study, where she could continue to prepare lessons even after the baby came. She had decided to take a break from teaching during the winter months following the birth, but planned to return to the schoolhouse in the spring. "The children need consistency," she explained when Ethan questioned whether it might be too much for her. And I need to continue doing what I love, even as I take on this new role of mother. As long as you don't overdo it, he conceded, always supportive of her independence. Miguel's wife has offered to help with the baby when you're teaching, and I can arrange my work to be home more during school hours. Their planning and preparation brought them even closer, as did the shared wonder of the new life growing within Sophia. Ethan would often place his hand on her expanding belly, marveling at the movement of their child. He's going to be a fighter, he said one night after feeling a particularly vigorous kick. Or she, Sophia reminded him with a smile. Either way, with us as parents, they're bound to be stubborn. As Sophia's pregnancy progressed, the memory of the fire that had brought them together seemed to fade into the past, just one chapter in their ongoing story. But on a hot, dry evening in late August, that night came rushing back with terrifying clarity. Sophia was sitting on the porch, enjoying the cooler air as evening approached, when she noticed a strange glow on the horizon toward town. At first, she thought it might be an unusually vibrant sunset, but as darkness fell, the glow remained, flickering ominously against the night sky. "Ethan," she called, rising awkwardly from the swing, one hand supporting her 7-month belly. "Come look at this." He emerged from the barn, where he'd been checking on a mare about to foal, and joined her on the porch. One look at the horizon had him springing into action. "Fire," he said grimly. "In or near town. Stay here. I'm going to saddle up and go see if they need help." "I'm coming with you," Sophia said immediately. Ethan shook his head. "It's not safe, Sophia. Not in your condition. It's White Pine, Ethan. Those are our friends, our neighbors. I can't just sit here not knowing." He looked at her determined face and sighed, recognizing the futility of argument. "All right, but you stay in the wagon, away from any danger. Promise me." "I promise," she agreed, already moving to gather what they might need: blankets, bandages, water. They drove toward town as quickly as was safe, the glow on the horizon growing brighter with each mile. As they crested the final hill before White Pine, they could see the source of the light. The saloon was fully engulfed in flames, and the fire was spreading to adjacent buildings. "Dear God," Sophia breathed, clutching Ethan's arm. "It's like that night all over again." Ethan's jaw tightened as he urged the horses faster. "Let's pray no one's trapped this time." When they reached the town, chaos reigned. Men formed bucket brigades from the water pump to the burning buildings. Women evacuated children and the elderly to safety, and Sheriff Miller directed operations from the middle of the street, his face grim in the firelight. "Vance?" he called when he spotted Ethan. "Thank God. We need every able body." The wind's pushing the fire toward the east side of town. Ethan jumped down from the wagon, already removing his coat. "Sophia, drive to Doc Patterson's and stay there," he ordered. "Help him prepare for any injuries." She nodded, fear clutching at her heart, as she watched him join the firefighting efforts. The scene was horribly familiar: the roaring flames, the shouted orders, the desperate race against time. But this fire was larger, more threatening, with multiple buildings already burning and others in immediate danger. At the doctor's small clinic, Sophia found organized activity already underway. Mrs. Patterson was setting up cots, while the doctor prepared bandages and medicines. "Sophia," Mrs. Patterson exclaimed when she entered. "You shouldn't be here in your condition." "I can help," Sophia insisted, setting down the supplies she'd brought. "What do you need me to do?" For the next hour, Sophia worked alongside the doctor's wife, preparing for casualties and comforting those who had already been brought in with minor burns and smoke inhalation. All the while, her thoughts were with Ethan, out there in the heart of the danger. Through the clinic's windows, she could see the fire's progress. It had spread to at least 5 buildings now, and the wind was indeed pushing it eastward, toward the church and schoolhouse. The very thought of losing those buildings, the heart of the community, was devastating. Then she heard a shout that made her blood run cold. The school! There are children inside. Without thinking, Sophia rushed to the door of the clinic, heedless of Mrs. Patterson's call to stop. Outside, she could see a group of people gathered near the schoolhouse, which was not yet on fire but was directly in the path of the advancing flames. "What's happened?" she demanded, grabbing the arm of a passing man. "3 of the Connolly children," he explained breathlessly. "They were playing in the schoolhouse when the fire started. Now they're too scared to come out, and the building's starting to smoke." Sophia's heart raced. The Connolly children were among her students' 8-year-old twins, Emma and Robert, and their 6-year-old brother, Thomas. Their father had likely been among the first to join the bucket brigade, unaware that his children were in danger. Without hesitation, Sophia began making her way toward the schoolhouse, driven by an instinct stronger than fear. She had nearly reached it when a familiar figure blocked her path. Ethan. His face streaked with soot, his eyes wild with worry. "What are you doing?" he demanded, gripping her shoulders. "You promised to stay at the clinic. The Connolly children are inside," she explained, gesturing toward the schoolhouse where smoke was now visibly seeping through the roof. "They're my students, Ethan. I have to help them." Understanding and fear warred on his face. Then he made a decision. "Stay here," he commanded. "I'll get them." Before she could protest, he was running toward the schoolhouse, disappearing inside just as the first flames became visible at its western edge. Sophia stood frozen, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other protectively covering her belly where their child moved restlessly. "Please," she whispered, not sure who she was addressing, God, fate, the universe. "Please let them be all right." The minutes stretched like hours as she waited, surrounded by townspeople who had gathered to watch, helpless to do anything as the fire continued its inexorable advance. Just when she thought she couldn't bear the suspense any longer, the schoolhouse door burst open. Ethan emerged, carrying Thomas in one arm while shepherding the twins ahead of him. All 4 were coughing from the smoke, but alive and moving. Sophia rushed forward as they reached safety, gathering the frightened children to her. "You're safe now," she assured them, checking them quickly for injuries. "You're all right." "They were hiding under the desks," Ethan explained between coughs. "Wouldn't come out at first. Mr. Vance said we had to be brave like you were in the fire," Emma said, looking up at Sophia with wide, tear-filled eyes. "He said you jumped out a window and didn't cry at all." Sophia met Ethan's gaze over the children's heads, love and gratitude overwhelming her. "Mr. Vance is very brave himself," she told the children. "Now let's get you to Doc Patterson so he can make sure you're all right." As they made their way back to the clinic, Sophia leaned close to Ethan. "Thank you," she whispered. "I was so afraid." He put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her against his side. "So was I," he admitted. "When I saw you heading for that schoolhouse, my heart nearly stopped." "I couldn't leave them," she said simply. "I know," he replied. "It's one of the reasons I love you so much." At the clinic, the Connolly children were reunited with their frantic father, who couldn't stop thanking Ethan for saving them. Doc Patterson checked all 4 smoke inhalation victims and pronounced them in need of rest but otherwise unharmed. "You should rest too," the doctor told Sophia sternly, noticing her pallor. "Think of the baby." "I will," she promised, sinking gratefully onto a chair. "As soon as I know the fire is under control." It took another 3 hours of backbreaking work by every able-bodied person in White Pine, but finally the fire was contained. 6 buildings had been lost: the saloon where it had started, the barbershop, 2 houses, the feed store, and ironically, the mercantile that had just been rebuilt after the previous year's fire. But the rest of the town had been saved, including the church and schoolhouse. Dawn was breaking by the time Ethan and Sophia finally returned home to their ranch, exhausted but grateful that no lives had been lost. The fire had started from a lantern overturned in a card game dispute, a distressingly common occurrence in frontier towns. "We'll rebuild," Ethan said as they sat on their porch, watching the sunrise. "White Pines survived worse." "Yes," Sophia agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "But I hope we don't have to relive that particular experience again anytime soon." Ethan placed his hand on her belly, feeling their child move beneath his palm. "No more fires, no more rescues," he agreed. "At least until this little one is ready to join us." Sophia covered his hand with hers. "I was so proud of you tonight," she said softly. "Those children might have died if not for you." "I just did what needed doing," he replied, echoing words he'd spoken to her after her own rescue. "Same as you would have." "We make a good team," she observed, smiling up at him. "The best," he agreed, bending to kiss her gently. "Now and always." In the weeks that followed the fire, White Pine once again demonstrated its resilience. Plans were made to rebuild the destroyed buildings, and in the meantime, those who had lost homes were taken in by neighbors. Sophia resumed her teaching, more determined than ever to provide stability for her students after their frightening experience. Ethan threw himself into preparations for the coming winter and the imminent arrival of their child. He finished the nursery, building a cradle from pine harvested on their own land, while Sophia sewed tiny garments in the evenings as they sat by the fire. "Do you think it's a boy or a girl?" she asked one night in late October, as the first snow of the season fell softly outside their windows. Ethan considered the question, his hand gently stroking her now prominent belly. "A girl," he decided, "with your spirit and intelligence." "I think it's a boy," Sophia countered with a smile, "with your courage and kindness." "Either way," Ethan said, leaning in to kiss her, "he or she will be the most loved child in Nevada territory." Their son, James Thomas Vance, arrived on a clear, cold morning in mid-November, almost exactly a year after Ethan had proposed. The labor was long but uncomplicated, with Doc Patterson attending and Mrs. Miller providing support and encouragement. Ethan remained by Sophia's side throughout, his quiet strength never wavering even when her pain was at its worst. When it was over and the tiny, red-faced infant was placed in Sophia's arms, both parents were rendered speechless by the miracle they had created. James had Ethan's dark hair and Sophia's determined chin, and when he opened his eyes for the first time, they were a deep, serious blue that made his father laugh with recognition. "He has your eyes," Sophia said, tracing a gentle finger along their son's perfect cheek. "And your lungs?" Ethan replied as the baby let out a lusty cry. "He's perfect, Sophia. Absolutely perfect." In that moment, holding their child between them, the circle that had begun with a desperate rescue from a burning building was completed. What had started as an act of courage had grown into love, partnership, and now, family, a journey neither had anticipated, but both now recognized as the greatest blessing of their lives. As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered under Ethan's careful management. Sophia continued teaching, bringing their son with her to school until he was old enough to stay with Miguel's wife during the day. The addition to the herd that Ethan had planned doubled the ranch's income, allowing them to hire more help and further improve their home. In the spring of 1882, their family expanded again with the birth of a daughter, Elizabeth Rose, who arrived with considerably less drama than her brother but equal joy. With her mother's honey-colored hair and her father's steady blue eyes, she quickly became the darling of both parents and the entire town of White Pine. One evening in the summer of 1883, as Sophia sat on the porch watching Ethan teach 4-year-old James to throw a lasso while Elizabeth napped inside, she was struck by a profound sense of contentment. The ranch spread before her, green and thriving in the evening light. The cabin, no longer just a cabin but a proper home with additions that had nearly doubled its size, was filled with books, music, laughter, and love. And beside her through it all was Ethan, her partner, her lover, her best friend. The man who had refused to leave her in a burning building, who had given her the courage to jump when there seemed no way out, who had caught her then and continued to catch her, in ways both literal and figurative, every day since. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, joining her on the porch swing while James continued practicing with his small rope. "How lucky I am," Sophia replied honestly. "How one moment of terror led to a lifetime of joy." Ethan took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in the familiar gesture that still, after all these years, sent a thrill through her. "I'm the lucky one," he said softly. "Walking into a fire was easy compared to believing I deserved happiness afterward. You gave me that belief, Sophia. You and our children. We gave it to each other," she corrected gently. "And we'll keep giving it, every day, for all the days we have." As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across their land, Ethan pulled her close and kissed her with a tenderness that still took her breath away. In the yard, James let out a whoop of triumph as his small lasso settled around a fence post. From inside the house came the first stirrings of Elizabeth waking from her nap. "I love you, Sophia Vance," Ethan murmured against her lips, "more with each passing day." "And I love you," she replied, her heart as full as it had ever been. "My cowboy, my hero, my home." Together they rose to attend to their children. Moving forward into the future, they continued to build a future that had begun in fire but flourished in the steady, enduring warmth of love.